Today we'll be looking at ideas for orchestrating the piece A Wee Irish Village Wakes. We're going to take the piano sketches we've been working on, put them into full orchestra, and then add some traditional Irish instruments. One is called a Bodhran, which is an Irish frame drum. We're also going to be using something called Uilleann Pipes, which are essentially Irish bagpipes, and a tin whistle. So this should be a lot of fun. Let's get started. We'll begin by looking at the A section of our piano sketch and moving that into the string section. Now, our piano sketch is block chords and a melody. And those block chords while you're sketching are great for hearing the harmonies against the melody, but they don't really say lively jig. Remember, the idea behind this piece is this wee Irish village waking up in the morning, the shops opening, all the hustle and bustle on the street. So we want our orchestration to reflect that. And I think of orchestration as an extension of the composing process, not something separate. Let's listen to the piano sketch as it is now, and then see how we might move that into the strings. The first thing I did was to move this melody line into the first violins. I've added some ornamentation. Originally we had this Irish ornament of a cut, a very quick upper grace note, and I've added two more cuts. I also added this slide, and that's exactly as it sounds. It's a slide from a note about a half step below up to the target note. And I've added some staccato markings. And this all helps to give this phrase a more authentic and kind of lively sound. Let's just listen to the first violins playing the melody. You can hear how adding those extra ornaments and articulations help to give that melody in violins 1 a really vibrant feeling. And we want to continue that into our other sections, so our violins 2, violas, and cellos. We're not going to be using the basses quite yet in this section. The way that I achieved this is by writing very specific lines for each one of our sections. And what I'm trying to do is use that idea of all this movement and commotion on the streets, these different things happening all at the same time, yet all working together. So how do I get them to work together? Let's look at this first few measures. Once I sorted out the melody line in violins 1, I wrote a line in violins 2 that would work with that melody. And there are several considerations that I took into account. The first being movement. Here you can see we have less movement in the violin 1 melody, and that gave an opportunity for there to be more movement in the violin 2. And vice versa here, where we have a lot of movement in the violin 1 melody, we have less movement in violin 2. I also don't want to fill up every nook and cranny with movement. Here you can see we have less movement in both violin 1 and violin 2, and that leaves room for the viola to have the movement. The next consideration for writing this line are what notes to use. I'm using mostly chord tones, especially on the strong beats, and I want to have consonant intervals wherever I can. So here we have a 6, which is a very consonant interval, and here we have a third, which is also a very consonant interval. 6 and thirds work really nicely. We can also use other intervals, like here we have a fourth, and that's fine. We just don't want to have a lot of parallel fourths or fifths in movement between these two lines. I also want to outline the chord wherever I can. So here where I have a D and an A, there are other notes that I'll need to express this D major chord, and the very important F sharp ends up in the viola. One other thing I'm thinking about, since I'm using notes from the D Mixolydian scale, is that on this first chord, I want to have a D major triad for the beginning of this chord. I can use this seventh degree, this lowered seventh degree, which makes it a D7 chord, a dominant chord. But I don't want that right on the downbeat because that will make that one chord less stable. Here, where I've waited to have it for a little bit, that's fine. And then that D7 leads very nicely into this G. So those are the things that I'm thinking about as I'm writing this line. And above all, I want to write a strong melody that can stand on its own and have its own character. Let's listen to this and see what this violin 2 line sounds like. And now let's hear that violin 2 line playing with the melody. You can hear how those lines work so well together. They really go hand in glove, and that's because they were designed that way. The next line that I worked on was the cello line, and the reason that I picked this next is because it's a very prominent line. The line on the bottom and the line on the top really stand out. I approached it exactly the same way that I approached the violin 2 line. The only difference here is that I did consider putting the root of the chord in the line where I could, where it made sense. All right, let's listen to this cello line and then we'll hear it against violin 1 and violin 2. Now we'll play that against the top 2 lines and listen to hear if the cello holds its line, if you can hear its part distinctly. To me, that cello line can be heard very clearly and it works with the other parts. Okay, the final part that I wrote here for the strings was this viola line. And the viola is a little bit different because it's kind of in the middle of all of this. So it's a little bit harder to pick its line out. And one of its functions is to fill in notes that we don't have in the chord. We want to make sure we express the full chord. So if we look here on this first chord, we have a D, an A, and a D, and we're missing that very important F sharp, the third of the chord. So I'm starting the viola melody here on this third. And then as it moves along, you can see it moves in contrary motion with the violin 1 part. And then here it's doubling the A, it's doubling the fifth of the chord, and that's because this line moves very nicely up to an A. Here we have an E and a C and another C, but we're missing the fifth of the chord, the G. So that's in the viola part, and many times that's what happens in the viola part. Let's listen to the viola now, and then we'll hear all of the parts together. So I would say that that viola part isn't quite as successful a melody as our other parts, yet it still fulfills its function. It's got movement where it needs to have movement, it's got its own personality, and it fills in the harmonies that we need. All right, now let's listen to all the parts together. This type of orchestration really does have a lively and upbeat feel, and there's a lot going on in these parts, but it works with the idea of our piece. There's a lot going on in the street. That's what we're trying to convey. Always thinking of our orchestration as part of the composition, not something separate. Those block chords were fantastic for figuring out our harmonies as we were sketching the piece, but in the end, we want something that really conveys this idea of all this hustle and bustle. All right, now we're going to look at the full score and listen to the first two A sections leading into our first B section. For the second A section, I've doubled those string lines that we worked on in the woodwinds, and I've also added this low D pedal on the downbeats of each of the measures of the second A. And it not only works with the harmonies, but it helps to build up this second A and add anticipation moving into the B section. All right, let's take a listen to this. Starting in the B section of the piece, I'll be using this traditional Irish instrument called a Bodhran. A Bodhran's a frame drum, and you play it with this stick called a tipper. You kind of hold it in a 45-degree angle to the drum, and then with downstrokes and upstrokes with your wrist, you strike the drum. It sounds like this. Now, a great Bodhran player can play some very fast and intricate rhythms with this. He can also get different sounds from the drum. So right now my hand is pressed in the back against the head of the drum, but if I move that off, I can get a more open sound. So you can get all sorts of different sounds with this. I am not a Bodhran player. This is my friend's. He was nice enough to lend it to me so that I could show you how this drum works. Let's listen to a part that I've sequenced with a nice Bodhran sample, and we'll hear what this sounds like. Let's start playing this part right here before the letter B. That is such a great sound. It has so much energy. One thing I think that we should look at a little closer is how I'm notating this part. And I couldn't find any standardized notation for this instrument, but I did see some different variations that made sense, and I thought I would simplify into this single line with these X notes and then these traditional notes. These traditional note heads mean that this is an open sound, and these X's are that more closed sound where the hand was against the drum head in the back. The D and U denotes a downstroke and an upstroke. And as far as I could see, there were other systems where there were arrows and different symbols, but I thought the D and the U was the most straight ahead. Let's listen to this Bodhran played in the B section with the other instruments and just that energy and excitement that it adds. We'll start in the same spot here right before letter B, and I'm zoomed in enough so that we can see the part and just the strings that are playing, but all the other instruments will be playing too. Let's take a listen to that. The next instrument we'll take a listen to is the tin whistle. The tin whistle is used in traditional Irish music and comes in a variety of keys. I'm using a tin whistle in G because our piece is mostly in D mixolydian and G major. So we've got that F sharp in our scale, and that G tin whistle has that diatonic G major scale. Now it can play some chromatic notes. I have one chromatic note here, this D sharp, but it requires a fingering that's not really idiomatic where you have to cover half of a hole. And they can do this, but I've only got one note like that. So on the session, if that wasn't working well or I had a problem with that, I could always change that note very simply. Let's take a listen to this sound. I'm sure you'll recognize it right away. It's such a great sound, and it really transports us into this world of this wee Irish village. Let's take a listen. That is such a great sound. It's so transformative. It has this ability to just transport you to another place. I just love using the tin whistle. One other instrument I want to talk about before we listen to the full orchestration is something called the Uilleann Pipes, which are an Irish bagpipe. And we started this piece in the key of D mixolydian. And the reason I did that is because the drones on the Uilleann Pipes are in D. So they'll be D drones, they're in octaves. And here I've written the D drone and then a melody over that drone. And it's very slow. This is supposed to be kind of like we're moving in on the village before the sun rises, before things open, and there's kind of this mist. And then once we hit the village, then we have all that hustle and bustle. I hope these ideas have helped and that you'll try some of them in your own orchestrations of your own piece. Now let's listen to our A Wee Irish Village Wakes, and I'll see you all next time.